All right. Thank you, Greg. Hopefully my voice holds out. Always great to get a cold right whenever you need to be speaking. Reducing risk of invasives, pretty broad topic here. We'll see once where we go with this. There's been some changes, if you're not aware, in the noxious weed law, and I wanted to bring you up to date on that. They made a new list as of September of last year, and this is a very extensive list now. Almost twice the length of list that we had before, and some species on there that I haven't seen for a while, and there's one species I think is missing on that list, but that's the way it goes. There's now 30 different species on the list, and these weeds must be controlled. That's the way the law reads. It's up to the township trustees to enforce the law to control these particular weeds. And that's based on somebody making a complaint. It's not the township trustee's job to find and search for these problems. It's up to people to report that. That's one of the discrepancies with this state compared to other Midwest states or plain states, how they manage their invasive or noxious weeds. So we're talking about noxious weeds. Some of the grass species, Johnson grass and shattercane were on there before, but now Columbus grass, which is called sorghum album, that's what I was always calling it. Didn't realize it had a common name of Columbus grass. Yellow groove bamboo is now on that, and serrated tussock. So we have 5 different grass species that are now on the noxious weed list. So some more that you need to be aware of. Broadleaf species, and the ones that are highlighted and italicized are the ones that are of most concern to me, and I think should be for you. The Palmer amaranth is certainly the pigweed species we should not have, and don't want to have. And we should take every effort possible to eliminate that plant anywhere we have them. Yes? The Russian knapweed is related to spotted knapweed, but it's a different knapweed. There are about 3 or 4 different knapweeds out there, and why Russian knapweed is on there and not spotted knapweed, I don't know. For those in the eastern and southern part of the state, spotted knapweed should be on the list. I don't know why. That was an oversight in my opinion. But the Palmer amaranth we don't want. Water hemp we have. It's been around for a while, since the late 1990s. We found some in the Plain City area. That was where it was at mostly, but then it started coming in on the western side of the state from Indiana, in that dark Mercer, Auglaize, Shelby County areas. That's where we've got the greatest frequency of water hemp today in the state. And then the mare's tail is considered a noxious weed. It's throughout the entire state, so I don't know how you manage that. And we don't manage it very well from a noxious weed law standpoint because it's so frequent. But certainly if we did manage that a little bit more, we'd have less out there. Kochia was a weed when we first started doing CRP plantings that would show up. That and Palmer showed up. Palmer showed up really in the 2000s already in these early CRP plantings along with Kochia, and we've done a very nice job of getting rid of the Kochia in our pollinator or conservation plantings, but we've not eliminated the Palmer, and the Palmer was now found last year in cover crop seed. That was the first time that I'm aware of it was in cover crop seed. Otherwise, it's always been in pollinator or conservation type plantings. The crestleaf ground soil is also on the list. It's pretty much throughout the state now. That's that yellow flowering weed that you see in late May and early June. It looks, some people confuse it with yellow rocket. It's obviously not related to it whatsoever. Those are 2 different families. But it's a wind dispersed seed like mare's tail, so you're not going to control where it goes. And we need to be concerned about it because it's toxic to livestock. It is poisonous, so we have to be concerned about that. Interesting now, hedge bindweed is on the list. I don't know why we put that on there. It's all the way throughout the entire state, but it's on the list. Leafy spurge is in the spurge family. It's something we don't want. It's a very serious pasture weed problem out in the plain states. And anytime you see that particular species, annihilate it and don't let it get started. The Russian knapweed is another one that's on the list, not quite as aggressive as the spotted knapweed, but still a problem for us. Perennial sow thistle we've always had, and so it's on the list now. So you can see there's some new species on the list. Some other ones, forage kochia, again, is not here, but might get here, and they're concerned about that. It's a more aggressive kochia. It's a perennial, so we need to be concerned about that. There's hairy white top or ball cress, heart-potted hoary cress. Field bindweed is also on the list, just like hedge bindweed. Japanese knotweed, it can take over an area very quickly. Tends to be more in the southern and eastern part of the state, so we need to be concerned about that one as well. Kudzu is in the southeast part of the state in a few areas. A very aggressive plant that we don't want. If you ever see it in a wooded area or other place, get rid of it. Apple of Peru is a nightshade species. We found it back when I was working for Mark Laux up in the Sandusky area in vegetable crops. I don't know how much we have left anymore, but it's on the list because it can be somewhat aggressive. Giant hogweed, that's in the carrot family. A very harmful weed if you break the plant open and get sap on you. You get very, very serious burns. So a plant that you don't want to be playing around with whatsoever. You can certainly die from that particular species. Mile minute, it's in the smartweed family. It's a vine, and so we need to be concerned about that. That would probably come in on the eastern side of the state because it's over in Pennsylvania. You can see we still have some more species on this list yet. Purple loosestrife, which is in the waterway areas. Musk thistle, poison hemlock, another plant that is spread throughout the whole entire state. But nonetheless, it's on the list because it's a poisonous plant. So we're concerned about that. We certainly need to keep it out of our pasture areas and hay areas in particular. Canada thistle is still on the list. Grapevines, these are basically abandoned grape harbors, is what the law reads for grapevines, not the wild ones. And then wild parsnip, another carrot family. Similar properties to hogweed and being burnt, but not nearly as severe. I've played around with that, have never had a problem. And then Russian thistle is somewhat related to kochia. And we don't want that one. That's out in the plain states as well, and so we're concerned about that. So those are the species that are on the noxious weed list. We now have an invasive weed list that came out in January of 18. There's 38 species on that list. And in this particular case with the invasives, we can't sell, propagate, distribute, or import any of these species on this list. It doesn't say anything in particular about controlling other than the ag director may seize, remove sale, or order it to be destroyed. That's the closest thing you have. So there's no teeth in this law that I could find that says you have to control these invasives. We're just stopping the sale of these particular species. Some of the species I got them broken down into groups. 2 cattails, hybrid cattail, narrowleaf cattail. Broadleaf weeds, cutleaf and common teasel is certainly something that we have here already. Very invasive. and can cause some problems if we're starting conservation plantings from CRP or non-crop areas. The spotted knapweed is on the invasive list, ma'am, but it's not on the noxious list. Garlic mustard, giant hogweed is on this list also. Dame's rocket, which is in the mustard family, that's that purple colored flower that you see in May, late May, early June in areas. Purple loosestrife, European wand loosestrife. The kudzu is on this list also. Fig buttercup, black dog, stranglevine, hairy willow herb, grass species, common reed, Phragmites, Japanese stilt grass, one rush species, flowering rush. And then there's a bunch of woody species on here, anywhere from tree of heaven to the olive species, buckthorn, the honeysuckles. All four of them are on the list. The calorie pear is on the list, although they made a concession that it can still be sold till 2023. So much for putting it on the list and still being let it sold. Then you've got multiflora rose that's on this list also. And then we've got a list of water species, water chestnut, curly leaf pondweed, yellow floating heart, and you can see the watermill foil, the parrot feather, European frog bit, hydrilla, and elodea. And then there's a sedge I missed, I realized afterwards. So ways that invasive or noxious weeds enter our seedings for us. Established populations. If we're going into areas that are not cropped, going into non-crop areas, we certainly have some of these species already there that we just listed. Canada thistle is likely to be in grassy areas. The teasels are likely to be in non-crop areas. So those are species that are already present that are going to cause us problems if we don't get them established. The next one that's very concerning is the weed seeds come in the seeds that we're purchasing. And the Palmer Amaranth has been the poster child for that and the one that we're most concerned about. And again, for the first time, it was found in cover crop seed this past year. Water is a way to move seeds very easily from one place to another. So once it gets here, you're going to move it from point A to point B. Birds and other animals are a good way. I shared with people yesterday that our waterfowl are a good way to move weed seeds. And so those things are moving, are migrating, are causing problems for us. Equipment, as we move equipment around. Humans, as we use our ATVs, it's a great opportunity to spread weed seeds. So some of the common species that are a problem with established populations. So water hemp is another one that if we're starting in a field and we're going to a cover crop or a conservation planting, if you have water hemp in that field, you've got to get rid of that as soon as you can, and that's a high priority to stop that weed. So that's something you need to take care of right away. Mare's tail, again, you need to make sure whether you have it there and manage it appropriately before you get started. The crestleaf groundsel is the same thing. Cutleaf and common teasel. Kochia, if it's there, which we don't have too much of that. The hedge bindweed, the field bindweed, and I don't think I put Canada thistle on there, but it should be on there along with poison hemlock. So these are some of the species. Again, kochia is not going to be there, but if it was, we need to be very careful of that. Those are some of the common ones that I think you need to be careful of and scouting for before you start. So how should we manage these established populations? You need to scout. That's the number one thing you need to do, especially going into a non-crop area, is make sure you know what vegetation is there. You have to know that, and the species I've mentioned on the last slide are some of the key species you need to get rid of in advance. You need to really start 2 years ahead of time. In many situations, we're starting now, and that's not a good recipe for success. especially if you have some of the noxious weeds, especially if you have Canada thistle. So there's two different choices. I've been working with ODNR, or Natural Resources, with the pollinator habitats along 33. And I think there's two strategies. One is to apply a broad spectrum broadleaf herbicide such as open site. That's just one example. I didn't pull out all the examples that you have, but you're going to have something that's going to get Canada thistle, something that's going to get teasels if you're in grassy areas. And you want to apply that. Make sure, though, that you're reading the label and it allows for rotation to the desired species that you want. Then the next fall, you apply glyphosate at 2.25 pounds acid equivalent on a high rate to make sure that we're getting everything controlled with the glyphosate and not killing things halfway. If you have mare's tail in that population, you're going to have to throw some 2,4-D in there. So know whether you have mare's tail. If you have it at all, put 2,4-D with it because it's likely to be resistant to glyphosate. And then in a lot of cases, this frost seeding in the winter or early spring works pretty well. Or you could drill it in the spring. But if you're going to drill it in the spring, I'd push that drilling back a little bit and apply another application of glyphosate, especially if you have Canada thistle out there. The other strategy is to apply glyphosate 2 years in advance at 2.25 pounds in the fall, and then apply glyphosate that next season in early June, trying to target Canada thistle. And if you have annual weeds, you're going to have to make another application probably about a month after that. And then you want to apply glyphosate in the fall again, depending upon what species. If you have bindweeds out there, you want to wait until, or go out there about the end of September. If you're trying to go after Canada thistle, you're going to have to go out there after a frost. And that would be the same thing if you're going after the teasel. You want to go out there after that point in time. And then again, you go out and do the frost seeding or drilling in the spring. And if you're drilling in the spring, again, you do a glyphosate application. I think those are the two strategies to go about, especially in areas that are non-crop or being reconverted from a CRP into a new conservation planting. What's the best way to deal with the weed seeds in purchased seeds? Have them tested. ODA will test your seed lots for you. Get that done. Do not plant a single one of these plantings without testing that seed. It has to be tested to make sure we don't have that Palmer amaranth in there or any other noxious weeds, because they will test those. So you contact ODA, the Grain Warehouse Feed Seed Division. They will pick up the seed. I don't know if they charge, but I know on their list they have a charge for testing for noxious weeds for pollinator habitats or conservation plantings. So, and that's a $25 charge, as I read their paperwork. So get that done. That's the only way you're going to stop this from occurring, is to stop that seeds. Don't plant the seeds if you find it. And then if you do plant without testing it, or even if you plant it and it was tested, go out and scout and scout and scout to make sure you can't find anything out there, because we don't want that Palmer out there. So just before I open up for questions, if I have, well, I got 5 minutes yet. So what do you do once you have the problem, right? That's where we get into a lot of situations, and there's no good solutions, right? There's no good solutions. If you have the Palmer, you need to pull it out. That's really the best solution, is to pull it out. I know there were many people last year that got it for the first time that were hand weeding their fields to eliminate them. That's the only way you're going to eliminate. One of the other strategies is mowing. Mowing is not 100% effective. Mowing large plants, if you especially mow forwards with the tractor first, you're going to run the plants over and not get them cut up. If you would mow backwards, you're going to have fewer plants being knocked over and more of them being cut up. We need to mow slowly when we're mowing to try and get as much cut up as we can. You're obviously going to have to get deviances in your agreements to make sure you can go out and mow. You're going to be told when you can and can't mow. Depends upon what weeds you have as to whether you can try to push the envelope on mowing, because certainly with Canada thistle, you want to mow before it produces any seeds. And so that isn't always where we're allowed to mow because we're worried about leaving the habitat for the birds. The other option is, if it gets bad enough, is to start all over again, which isn't a cheap way to go. And then if you have the seeds introduced into the population, you may have some in the soil yet that you're going to have to deal with in the next planting that you have to deal with. We can use herbicides also. Hopefully you can just spot treat and not spray the whole area. But in a lot of cases, we're trying to control broadleaf weeds. And so you're going to kill any pollinator type plants, the forbs that you planted out there. You're going to kill those and have to reseed those. So it's not a good solution. Try to do everything you can in front of. That's why I started with that. Do everything you can beforehand to eliminate everything and not let the seeds get established or come in. With that, any questions?
You buy the seed, it's expensive, you have to test it, they find it not is there any recourse on getting your money back?
I don't know the answer to that. You're going to have to take that up with the seed company. I know some of them don't work as well as others with that. I don't know that the state has any recourse or any way to get that money back guaranteed.
Question over here, Jeff.
Are there any PDFs on the OSU website that kind of lays this out so we can print it out just to have to give to landowners and things like that?
No, there isn't any PDFs like this. This is a vague area that we have that nobody deals with on a regular basis. But if you give me your contact information, I could share the presentation with you.
Other questions?
Just a point of clarification on the noxious weed list. You clearly identified contacting OEA. A lot of folks will shop the cheap seed, and then that seed will be tested in whatever state you're buying that from against their noxious weed list. Ohio, Minnesota, and I think one more state are the only 3 states that list palmer as a noxious weed. So if you buy seed from another state and they test it against their state's noxious weed list, it's not going to show up as noxious weed. You're going to bring that in, and then you're going to have a situation like Jeff talked about. So ensure, if you're buying seed from out of state and buying cheap seed, ensure that it's tested against Ohio's list. And they right now are currently, if there's any pigweed in it, they're deeming it unacceptable because of the cross-pollination and hybridization that they're seeing taking place. The DNA testing, as far as I know, did not prove to be successful or economic. So make sure you're testing it against Ohio's noxious weed list.
Thank you.
Is it true with palmer cameras that you pull it out, you throw it down?
Well, many weeds can regrow when they're pulled out. So you need to make sure that the roots are not touching the soil, or you pull the plant out of that area to ensure that it's not re-rooting.
I missed the first part of your presentation, but did you discuss at all like cover crops and a matter of, some of that stuff purchased locally, but sometimes you purchase stuff from a long ways away, and you may not know what's in it, whether it's tested or whatnot.
Yeah, I didn't cover that too much, but the gentleman up here made a nice comment about knowing where your seed is coming from and making sure it's being tested for the noxious weeds that we have in the state. So, but I didn't make any comments other than having it tested and making sure it's tested.
Let's thank Jeff for toughing it through.